Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something I think a lot of people wonder about. Why is it that introverts so often feel misunderstood?
Yeah.
We're going to look at those common things, the quietness, needing time alone, the way they really mull things over internally.
And how those get twisted,
Uh,
right? Seen as shy or stuck up or just not interested.
Exactly. So our mission, if you like, for this deep dive is to really dig into why that happens. Why do these misinterpretations crop up?
And what's the deal with this, extrovert ideal we seem to have? We'll also talk about the real strength introverts have and the kind of pressures they're under because of all this misunderstanding.
And we've got some great stuff to draw on some philosophy, real-life examples, historical figures, too. It should be pretty interesting.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's dive right in. That silence thing.
Yeah.
Why is it that when an introvert is quiet, people assume nothing's happening? Like it's empty space instead of maybe a whole world churning inside.
That's such a key question. It really hits on our cultural bias, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We live in a world where, loud often equals important. Speak up, speak often, and people think you're smart, engaged.
Right. So quiet means disengaged or nothing to add.
That's the easy assumption. But, and this is the fascinating bit, what if that silence isn't absence at all? What if it's actually packed with thought?
And, that idea isn't exactly new. If you go back to Plato, the Republic, he saw silence, contemplation as, vital for really knowing things. He said the path of knowledge begins in silence. Makes you wonder, right? In our rush to talk, are we skipping that first crucial step, the internal bit?
Precisely. And for introverts, this quiet, it's often just how they operate. It's not awkward or forced.
What's their default?
Yeah, kind of. They process things inside first, think it through, then maybe speak. It's a choice, a way of understanding, not some kind of social failing.
You see that so clearly in history. Like Abraham Lincoln led the U.S. through, chaos, basically.
Right.
But he was known as quiet, thoughtful. I bet some people back then saw that quietness and thought, is he indecisive?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, I'm sure.
Huh?
But then you read the biographies, and it's a totally different story.
Yeah.
His silence wasn't emptiness. It was where the hard work happened, the analysis, figuring out his deep moral stance. Think about the Gettysburg Address.
Powerful stuff.
Incredibly. But it wasn't just like an emotional outburst. It came from long, quiet thought. That quiet was actually his strength.
And then there's Rosa Parks. Her act on the bus in 55. It was all about silence, wasn't it?
A very powerful silence.
Yeah, not shouting, just
Right.
a firm, quiet no. And she was apparently quite introverted, reserved.
It completely flips that idea that silence equals weakness or doing nothing, doesn't it?
Totally.
It shows how deep internal strength can spark huge external change. And think about everyday life.
Like at work.
Yeah, exactly. The introvert in the meeting might not jump in first, but the idea they eventually offer, born from that quiet processing, it could be gold.
But if everyone just thinks they're not paying attention.
Then that insight gets lost, which is bad for them and bad for the team or the company or whatever.
Yeah. Really makes you think about what we miss when we only value the noise. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. What about needing solitude? Society can be a bit weird about that, right? Like being alone is automatically lonely or antisocial.
It really can be viewed that way, but for introverts, solitude is often, fuel.
Fuel, how so?
It's how they recharge, get away from all the external noise, sort out their thoughts, connect with themselves. It's often where the creative sparks fly, where they figure things out.
So why do we often see it so negatively as a culture?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like we've forgotten how good it can be just to be with your own thoughts.
But philosophy offers a different view again. Nietzsche, for example. He was big on solitude for, self-growth and thinking original thoughts.
Yeah, he said, great individuals create their own worlds in solitude.
Create their own worlds. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, I think the idea is that stepping away from the crowd, the constant chatter, lets you actually hear yourself think. Find your own truth, your own ideas. And you know his other famous line, that which does not kill us makes us stronger.
Sure.
You could kind of apply that here, too. For an introvert, choosing solitude isn't running away. It's often what builds up their inner strength, their resilience.
Look at Emily Dickinson. Lived this really solitary life.
Extremely solitary.
And some might just see isolation. But clearly, it was incredibly fertile ground for her poetry.
Absolutely. That reclusiveness, it let her build this intense connection with nature, with her own mind, her soul, and it all poured out into those poems.
So her solitude wasn't about lacking connection.
No, it was a different kind of connection, maybe deeper with herself, her art.
And it's not just artists. Sir Isaac Newton.
Oh, yeah. Classic example.
Preferred being alone, quiet. And those weren't just like personality quirks. They were essential for his work.
Totally. Gravity, calculus.
Yeah.
Those massive breakthroughs didn't come from, lively workshops.
Right. They came from him, alone, thinking deeply, in his study, in the garden.
His introverted ability to just dive deep into thought, block out distractions, that was key to unlocking these huge mysteries about how the universe works.
Wow. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much potential gets squashed because we don't respect that need for solitude in some people.
And the pressure on introverts must be huge.
Feeling guilty for wanting alone time.
Exactly. It's incredibly taxing. They can start to feel like something's wrong with them just for needing to recharge that way.
That could lead to anxiety, feeling down.
For sure. And it stops them from being their best selves, bringing their unique gifts. We really need to see this need for solitude not as a flaw, but just how some brains work, how they refuel and process.
Yeah, shift the perspective.
Yeah.
See it as a path to insight, maybe.
Precisely. Value it as a different way of being productive and creative.
Okay, that's a really important point. Now let's talk about something less visible, but maybe even more defining for introverts. That deep internal processing. What does that actually look like? How do they handle information differently inside?
Well, one key difference seems to be that introverts process things, stimuli from the outside world, more thoroughly internally.
More thoroughly?
Yeah, like they take it in, and then there's this deeper level of analyzing, reflecting, connecting it to other things, organizing it in their mind before they respond or act.
It's like an internal sorting office.
Kind of. A more complex internal network for sifting and making sense of stuff.
Okay, so this internal workshop.
Yeah.
How does that affect things like making decisions or reacting in the moment?
Well, often it leads to more careful, thoughtful decisions. They tend to weigh things up more, consider consequences.
Sounds good.
It is, but in our fast-paced world that loves quick answers.
It can look like hesitation or being unsure.
Exactly. It can be misinterpreted as being slow or not assertive enough.
Which makes me think of Descartes. I think, therefore I am. That feels very inward-looking. Does that connect here?
It's a really strong parallel, actually. For many introverts, their sense of self, their whole reality, is deeply tied to that inner world of thoughts and reflections.
It's where they are.
In a way, yeah. The internal landscape isn't just passive. It's where ideas are born, where they make sense of everything.
And a prime example of this deep processing leading to huge insights. Albert Einstein.
Oh, definitely. Known introvert, incredible capacity for deep thought.
His big ideas didn't come from debating teams, right?
Yeah, not typically, no. They came from him, thinking deeply, often alone. The theory of relativity that emerged from his intense internal wrestling with fundamental questions.
Did he say something about math?
Yeah, something like, I wasn't great at mathematics, but I could think deeply about problems. That ability to just sink into thought, sustain it, that was central.
And it's interesting, Carl Jung, the guy who basically gave us the terms introvert and extrovert.
Yeah.
He was an introvert himself, wasn't he? Spent ages exploring his own inner world.
Absolutely. His major psychological theories, archetypes, the collective unconscious, they came directly from his own self-observation, that deep internal dive.
So he wasn't just observing others, he was living it.
Right. He gave us a framework for seeing introversion not as like a problem, but as a valid, valuable way of being oriented towards your inner world, a source of insight.
Okay, so when we see an introvert pause, take a beat, we might be totally missing the complex mental machinery whirring away under the surface.
That's exact.
And it leads to big misunderstandings about what they can do, what they contribute.
That pause isn't usually about being unprepared. It's part of the process. But if it's seen as slowness or not getting it,
their ideas get ignored.
Yeah.
Or they don't even get a chance to share them.
Yeah, they can be overlooked, undervalued. And that's a genuine loss in work, in discussions, everywhere.
It really shines a light on this mismatch, doesn't it? Between how different people think and what our society tends to shout about valuing.
Yeah.
Which brings us neatly to this whole idea of extroverted ideals. It feels like, especially in Western culture, being outgoing, sociable, quick-talking, that's held up as the gold standard.
Oh, definitely. Modern society, especially here, has this strong, often unspoken bias.
You see it everywhere, right? Open plan offices, endless group work.
Emphasis on networking, constant communication, being assertive, speaking up first. It's all geared that way.
And for introverts, whose natural style might be totally different, That must be exhausting.
It puts huge pressure on them. It can feel like they're always trying to squeeze into a mold that just doesn't fit.
Susan Cain's book, Quiet, hit such a nerve with this, didn't it?
It really did. She showed how American culture, especially over the last 100 years or so, started really favoring the extrovert personality.
And labeling introvert traits as problems, weaknesses.
Yeah, things to be fixed or overcome. But Cain argues brilliantly that this totally misses the unique, powerful strengths introverts possess.
And it's not just bad for introverts.
No, it's bad for everyone. Society loses out on their deep thinking, their focus, their often more measured approach.
We need to remember those strengths, don't we? That capacity for deep thought, empathy, careful decisions, intense focus.
Absolutely. They're often amazing listeners, notice details others miss, bring that long-term view.
Think about Bill Gates.
Right. Famous introvert, co-founder of Microsoft.
His introversion shaped how he led, didn't it? Preferring the deep work.
Yeah, focusing on coding, complex problems, strategy. That was his zone. Less about constant public schmoozing. Colleagues describe him as a deep thinker, incredibly focused.
So his quietness wasn't a barrier to success.
Quite the opposite. His deep thinking and focus were crucial for building Microsoft. It proves leadership isn't just about being loud and charismatic. Deep insight counts. Big time.
And then switching worlds again. J.K. Rowling.
Another great example. Describes herself as an introvert, loves solitude, loves getting lost in her imagination.
And the whole idea for Harry Potter came to her when she was alone, right? On a train.
Exactly. That quiet internal space let her build this incredibly rich world that, well, captivated millions.
Her story really shows the power of that inner landscape introverts have, the amazing things that can come out of it.
It really does.
It just hammers home how much we miss if we only value the outward stuff, the constant interaction, and that pressure to always be on, to fit that extrovert mold.
Yeah.
It must cause a lot of internal struggle for introverts.
Oh, absolutely. They can start feeling like something's deeply wrong with them because they don't match up.
So they try to fake it, be more extroverted.
Yeah, which just drains them emotionally, mentally, and it stops them from using their real strengths. We desperately need a shift,
Towards valuing both.
Yes, towards seeing silence, deep thought, needing solitude, not as flaws, but as assets. Assets for creativity, leadership, problem solving. Different, but just as valuable.
Definitely. And, the fallout from this constant misunderstanding, it's not just about missing out on ideas at work or awkward parties. It goes deeper, doesn't it? It hits their well-being.
Oh, absolutely. Feeling constantly judged or like you need to fundamentally change who you are, that takes a massive emotional toll.
It can lead to stress, anxiety.
Chronic stress, anxiety, a real knock to your self-confidence.
Yeah. It's like getting this constant message, you're not quite right. The way you are isn't the ideal way.
Exactly. Which fosters those feelings of being abnormal or flawed just for not fitting the mold.
And that forces them into wearing a mask, right?
Right.
Acting in ways that aren't authentic.
Totally. Think of the introvert forcing themselves to be super outgoing at a party.
Exhausting.
Utterly depleting. And afterwards, they can actually feel more lonely and isolated because it feels like nobody gets the real them.
Yeah, does this also affect how they see their own strengths? Like, do they start to doubt their own good qualities?
That's a really critical point. Yes, they can. They might undervalue their ability to listen well or think deeply just because society seems to cheer louder for other things.
Like being quick on your feet or commanding attention.
Right. So they might downplay their talent for careful observation or focused work because it's less flashy. And that can seriously hold them back from reaching their potential, from finding paths where they'd naturally shine.
It feels like a big part of this whole mess is just a communication breakdown and maybe a lack of empathy between different types.
I think that's spot on. Extroverts might see the quietness and think it's indifference, maybe even rudeness.
While introverts might hear the constant talking and think it's overwhelming, or maybe even a bit superficial.
Exactly. And without understanding why the other person is behaving that way, those misinterpretations just build walls, create distance.
It almost takes us back to Plato again, his allegory of the cave.
How so?
Well, the prisoners mistake the shadows for reality, right? Because all they know. Maybe our extrovert-leaning society sometimes mistakes the introvert's rich inner world for just shadows, because it doesn't fully grasp the reality, the value of that internal depth.
That's a really powerful way to put it. Yeah, the deeper, quieter, less visible stuff. It can easily get dismissed if you're not attuned to looking for it or valuing it.
So where does that leave us? It sounds like it boils down to two things. Introverts needing to accept and value themselves, and society needing to make a real effort to understand and appreciate these differences.
Exactly. It's a two-way street. Introverts owning their strengths, and the wider culture broadening its definition of what's valuable, what's effective. Recognizing that both ways of being bring vital things to the table.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it seems clear that introverts get misunderstood, largely because we misread the signs, right?
Yeah.
Silence looks empty, needing space looks like isolation, thinking deeply looks like being slow.
And the big takeaway is, these aren't flaws. They're actually unique strengths, sources of creativity, deep thought, real innovation.
And we've seen that backed up by philosophy, Plato, Nietzsche, Descartes.
And by the lives of incredible people, Lincoln, Rosa Parks, Emily Dickinson, Newton, Einstein, even modern figures like Bill Gates and J.K. Rowling.
In a world that's often just loud,
Yeah.
there's something really powerful about quietness. And introverts kind of embody that, bring that richness.
They're deep thinking, empathy, focus. These are huge assets for society. We need them.
So the call to action then?
It's really about challenging these old misunderstandings, creating space for introverts to just be themselves, contribute authentically.
So respect the silence. See solitude differently.
Yeah, see it as a sanctuary maybe, and really trying to listen to understand those quieter voices, that inner world.
And maybe, just maybe, by trying harder to understand introverts, we end up understanding ourselves and humanity a bit better too.
I think so. There's maybe a lot of wisdom, a lot of empathy hidden in those quiet depths we tend to rush past.
So perhaps a final thought for everyone listening. Maybe try being still for a moment. Look inward. Look closely. See the value, the beauty in the quiet.